In recent Ubiquiti's UniFi OS update, there was a new feature included. It's for gateway high availability. Ubiquiti calls it shadow mode. So in this video, let's talk about the initial setup, and then I'm going to do some testing. I will summarize whether it meets my expectations and what my findings are. This is my lab environment. The UDM Pro in the upper part, the green one, is the one I have been using as the gateway for my lab. And the lower part, the red UDM Pro, is the one I want to use for the high availability configuration. I have connected these two UDM Pros with one cable. One end plug into the second UDM Pro's WAN part, the RJ45 part. The other end connects to the existing UDM Pro's LAN part. And from the LCD screen for the second UDM Pro, you can see it's ready to be adopted. However, if I go to UniFi Network Controller for the first UDM Pro, I don't see any prompt, any message asking me to do anything about the new UDM Pro. So apparently it's not working. But why? It's due to the old version of the firmware for the new UDM Pro. Apparently, the most straightforward way to update the firmware for the new UDM Pro is I launch a browser, go to the LAN network of the new UDM Pro, and do a initial setup, just like I don't want it to be part of the high availability. I want to set it up as a standalone UDM Pro. Once the fake setup is done, I can do the firmware upgrade. Once it's updated, I can reset it to factory default. Right? But I don't want to go that way. The preferred approach for me is SSH update. So I will connect a computer temporarily to the LAN part of the second UDM Pro to do the firmware upgrade. You can see this is the extra temporary Ethernet cable I just plug in to the second UDM Pro. The lower left window is the computer I just connected to the second UDM Pro, the LAN part. An interesting observation, if you check the network setting, you can see the subnet is not the normal .1, it's .0. This is the router IP address. This is the IP address we want to SSH into, right? Normally, the subnet is 192.168.1, but why this time is .0? Remember, we didn't change anything to the second UDM Pro, right? Because we connect the WAN part to the LAN part of the first UDM Pro. And the first UDM Pro, the LAN subnet is .1. Just to avoid conflict, the software automatically set the subnet for the LAN part of the second UDM Pro to the .0 subnet. Okay, that's interesting. Let's SSH into it. This is a UDM Pro. We never changed anything, right? So the SSH setting remains default, which means the username is root. The password is UBNT. Okay, we are in. So first we need to confirm the second UDM Pro does have a lower firmware version. Run the command info. So you can see the firmware version is 1.12.22. It's very old, more than 2 years old firmware. Just to compare, in the upper right window, let me SSH to the first UDM Pro. And you can see this is the output. It has much higher firmware version. After seeing the dramatic difference between the two versions, I changed my mind. You may know if you go with the SSH update route, sometimes if the version is very different, you may have to do it in multiple steps to incrementally upgrade to some versions in the middle. I want to avoid all the troubles, so I decided to go with the web update approach. Now let me set up the second UDM Pro in standalone mode first. then the console will update itself automatically. Interestingly, it only automatically upgraded to 1.12.38. You can see now the UniFi OS is showing update available. Apparently, even you go with the web interface way, you still have to upgrade the OS step by step. It's not directly upgrade to the newest version. Let me click the update button. Okay, finally, we are at the latest version for UniFi OS. Just to update the UniFi OS or the firmware is already a journey. You may wonder, this video is about shadow mode. Why you spend such a long time just to show us the OS update? The reason is to update the second UDM Pro to the required version is very important. Think about it. When people get the second UDM Pro, it's almost guaranteed the OS is outdated. You have to do the update. So that's why I want to show you the tedious, long process. Okay, now we have the required version. We are ready to reset it to factory default. Go to console settings, factory reset. Now you can see on the UniFi network controller for the first UDM Pro, there's a pop-up. It already detected a new UDM Pro. Ask me whether I want to set it to shadow mode. Of course, yes. It's done immediately. See here in the OS setting, this box was not here before we did the shadow mode setup. It's co-located consoles, UDM Pro, and the shadow mode is in sync. But the second UDM Pro is not listed as a device for the first UDM Pro. It's in the so-called shadow mode. On the screen in the lower part is a computer connected to the secondary UDM Pro. I'm showing a terminal. It displays the IP address before it became the shadow mode gateway. You can see the subnet is 0, right? Now let me refresh the DHCP. Then let's see whether anything's changed. No, it's still in subnet 0, which implies even though the shadow mode has already been established, the second UDM Pro doesn't really have the same network configuration as the first one. It's just the primary UDM Pro's network configuration is somehow saved somewhere in the second UDM Pro, but it's not effective. So the effective one for the second UDM Pro is still the initial one before the shadow mode configuration. Just to prove that, let me SSH to the secondary UDM Pro again. The same username and the same password, UBNT. It doesn't work already. The SSH credentials has been synced to be the same as the primary one. Let me use the primary UDM Pro's SSH credentials to try again. Yeah, I'm in. Then let me check whether the secondary UDM Pro, which is in shadow mode, whether it has, for example, the same VLAN configuration. No, it only has .1 network for S8, which is the one part, and .0 network for the bridge, which is my LAN. It doesn't have the same network configuration as the primary one. If I try to use web browser to access the web page for the secondary UDM Pro, this is what I get. I got a JSON code. It's interesting because it's not the normal web server's reply in HTTP status code. No, it's JSON reply, which implies somehow the secondary UDM Pro's web server is acting as a API endpoint. When the secondary UDM Pro is in standby mode or in the so-called warm spare mode, the first UDM Pro will use some kind of API to do the syncing. It's just my guess because there's no any Ubiquiti document about how the synchronization works. From the first UDM Pro's configuration page, On the co-located consoles box, if you click any UDM Pro, it doesn't matter whether it's the primary or the secondary one. You can see the shadow mode is in sync. Last time of the synchronization was 2 hours ago, and according to Ubiquiti, every 3 hours the synchronization will be automatically done. If you want, you can manually synchronize it. You will see the synchronization is lightning fast, which means it doesn't have to be 3 hours. What if I want more frequent synchronization, right? But unfortunately, Ubiquiti doesn't provide you any way to customize the frequency. Let me try to change some network configuration. Let's see how the manual synchronization works. Go to network controller. For example, if I want to remove this U6 Lite AP, okay, it's done from the primary UDM Pro, right? Then let me go back to the console. Of course, the automatic synchronization hasn't happened yet, but let me manually sync it. See, in just several seconds, it's done. The delta synchronization is very fast. On the secondary UDM Pro's small LCD screen, you can also see the status. It says in sync. So in the normal mode, when disaster hasn't happened yet, the primary UDM Pro is still the effective router or gateway in your network. And the secondary UDM Pro, it just stays there, wasting electricity without really doing any effective things. Of course, it's actively receiving delta synchronization from primary gateway, but that's it. This is my first complaint about the current Ubiquiti's implementation, the so-called high availability implementation, because the target consumer for the UDM Pro is either a small business or home users. If you want them to run a secondary UDM Pro sitting there 99.9% of the time, it's just staying in idle mode, it will be a hard sell. So the ideal situation is the secondary UDM Pro should be active in normal operation. It can do load balancing. The two UDM Pros can work together so that they can distribute the workload. That's the ideal situation. Of course, this is just the first release of the high availability for UniFi gateways. I hope in near future, Ubiquiti can add the load balancing feature. Ubiquiti called the secondary UDM Pro, the shadow mode UDM Pro, as warm spare. Warm means you need to have it powered on. Spare means it's not really doing anything. Okay, let me move on to the most important part of this video, failover. If some disaster happened to your primary gateway, your secondary gateway should take it over and your network should still be operational. This process is called failover. Let's see how it works in Ubiquiti's implementation. Another thing I really want to test it out is about UniFi Protect. Ubiquiti called this shadow mode implementation part of the gateway high availability, which implies it only includes network configurations. But if you use UDM Pro, you may use the UniFi Protect, which comes with UDM Pro. What will happen in the failover process? Whether you can still access your camera or even your historical recordings once the failover happens. So that's another thing I want to test. At this moment, the primary UDM Pro is in normal mode and the secondary in shadow mode. Now let me cut off the power to the first UDM Pro just to simulate a disaster. Okay, primary is done. The secondary UDM Pro needs some time. Okay, you can see the screen is changed. It says tap to proceed. See, the orange Ethernet cable is still connecting the primary UDM Pro's LAN to the secondary UDM Pro's WAN. This type of connection is required in the normal mode, but we are in the failover process. Once the process is done, if we power on the primary UDM Pro again, this cable will cause trouble, so I need to remove it. Then it comes my problem with the Ubiquiti's guidance regarding the manual failover process. According to Ubiquiti, the next step is to connect the one part for the secondary UDM Pro using the primary UDM Pro's WAN cable. But if I do that, the secondary UDM Pro will go back to the shadow mode, just like nothing's happened. So the failover process will never complete. So what I do is just to ignore Ubiquiti's guidance, follow the on-screen instruction because it tells me to tap to proceed. So let me tap to proceed. Okay, now the screen display is changed. It asks me to plug in the cables. Let me replug both the WAN cable and the LAN cable from the primary UDM Pro to the secondary one. Now go to the computer. If I use the .1.1 IP address, which belonged to the primary UDM Pro, now it should belong to the second one, right? If I use that IP address to visit the web page, you can see the secondary UDM Pro is busy restoring from backup. After several seconds, I can log on. So I use the same credentials as in the primary UDM Pro to do the logout. I'm in. If I go to the network controller, you can see it does have the most recent configuration. Remember, we did a test. We removed U6 Lite, right? So now U6 Lite is not here. Keep in mind, now I'm visiting the secondary UDM Pro, and it has the same configuration as the primary UDM Pro, which means the failover for the network is successful. The next thing is I want to see whether the UniFi Protect still works. So let me go to Protect. See, it says HDD is required. In my setup, I only installed the hard drive in the primary UDM Pro. The secondary has blank hard drive tray. If I go to the devices, I can see the camera is there. The only missing thing is the hard drive. The configuration, the camera is successfully failed over already. So then let me try to pull out the hard drive from the primary one and put into the secondary one. Let's see whether everything will fail over automatically. After plugging the hard drive offline mode for some time, and then it recovered automatically. If I go to playback for the camera, scroll to the history, I have all the historical recordings. So nothing's gone. Everything in the hard drive was successfully carried over to the secondary UDM Pro just by swapping the hard drives. At this moment, the primary UDM Pro is done. The secondary UDM Pro is not in shadow mode already, because if we check the OS settings for the secondary UDM Pro, you can see the original co-located box for the two UDM Pros is gone, and it's just like nothing's happened. The secondary UDM Pro now is acting as a standalone UDM Pro. There's no high availability, there's no shadow mode, it's standalone. Next part for the testing, what if at this moment I have the primary UDM Pro back? I want to go back to the original high availability mode, and I want to put the secondary UDM Pro back to shadow mode. How I can do that? Let me power on the primary UDM Pro just to simulate a recovery. In the meantime, let me plug back the WAN part cable and the LAN part cable from the secondary UDM Pro back to the primary one. And of course, reconnect the orange color cable from the WAN part of the secondary UDM Pro to the LAN part of the first UDM Pro. Then swap the hard drive back. Then let me refresh the UniFi web interface for the primary UDM Pro. So the system is doing something apparently. It's very slow. Give it some time. Okay, the primary UDM Pro completely goes back to the configuration before the shutdown. It is still showing the co-located consoles. The shadow mode is offline, even though we already reconnected all the cables for the two UDM Pros. So which means currently this physical secondary UDM Pro is not recognized as the shadow mode gateway already, even though it's still the same machine. It's not treated as the shadow mode machine anymore. This is bad already, right? Let me connect to the secondary UDM Pro. Let's see what's the configuration over there. This is the computer I connect to the LAN part of the secondary UDM Pro. Let me see what's the current subnet. See, it's .1. Even though at this moment, I don't think the second UDM Pro should have the active configuration. It should go back to the shadow mode. Apparently, it didn't happen. So the secondary UDM Pro still has the network configurations, which became effective during the failover process. If I go to the web interface for the secondary UDM Pro, you can see I can still use the primary UDM Pro's credentials to log on, and all the configurations are the same as the primary UDM Pro, except for the shadow mode. The current situation is the disaster has been recovered. We want to go back to the normal days, which is I have a primary UDM Pro, I have a shadow mode UDM Pro, right? It didn't happen automatically. I have two active UniFi gateways in my network. It is bad. And from the UI, I don't see any option to go back, which means I need to manually reset the secondary UDM Pro, and I need to manually add it back to the high availability. I need to reconfigure the shadow mode starting from scratch. It is too bad. So let me do it now. In the primary UDM Pro, I need to remove the shadow mode UDM Pro. So there's an option here. Remove it. It's quickly done. In the secondary UDM Pro, let me go to the console setting, then do a factory reset. See, there's a pop-up asking me whether I want to set the new UDM Pro in shadow mode. Of course, yes. Okay, we are done. We are back to the wonderful world. We have a primary UDM Pro and a secondary one in shadow mode. We are done with the testing. Let me summarize. Regarding the firmware update and initial setup, I have no complaints. It's simple enough. But about the normal operational situation, I have a complaint because the secondary UDM Pro most of the time is wasted. It's just a warm spare. I wish Ubiquiti can add the load balancing feature to the secondary shadow mode UDM Pro. Then regarding the failover, the main problem from my side is it's completely manual. You need to hit a button on the secondary UDM Pro's small LCD, and you need to manually swap the hard drives. You need to manually swap all the cables. High availability implies it's automatic. The most important failover process currently needs so many human interventions. It's very bad implementation. Of course, this is just the first release. I believe in near future, Ubiquiti will make the process more automatic. I had a video on my channel regarding my disappointment for Ubiquiti's PDU. There's a feature, it's highlighted in official user's menu, but it's never released, it's never implemented. I hope that feature is related to the high availability for UniFi gateway and the feature is implemented very soon. My another complaint is about the failover steps described by Ubiquiti on its help document. Because I followed it, it didn't work for me. It's about the sequence when to hit the tab to proceed, when to swap the cables. In my way, only after tapping the button to proceed, then I swap the one cable. It worked for me. Not big deal, but I want to point it out. One more thing I want to point out regarding this guidance from Ubiquiti is about the hard drive. Because the hard drive is mentioned as a very important step in Ubiquiti's guidance, but the document doesn't mention anything about what's the HDD for. It may give you the wrong impression that the configurations, including the network configurations from the primary UDM Pro, is stored in the hard drive. So during the failover process, you need to swap the hard drive so that the failover can happen. In fact, it's not the case at all. You already see in my testing, if I don't care about UniFi Protect, I don't even need to swap the hard drive. So the hard drive is only for UniFi Protect, which makes sense. But this document really give me confusion about what's this step for. My very last problem about the failover is once the disaster has been resolved, I want to go back to the normal status. There's no way for me to do that. I have to manually reset the secondary UDM Pro. I have to configure the shadow mode from scratch. This is very bad and not even mentioned in this Ubiquiti's document. This is a very long video because I really want to share my good and bad experience when it comes to this seemingly exciting high availability feature from Ubiquiti. Okay, thanks for watching.